Newly circulated records are raising fresh questions online after a set of political fundraising emails, allegedly tied to Donald Trump's 2020 campaign, appear to have been delivered to an email account associated with Jeffrey Epstein. The claims are being discussed widely because the messages reportedly used an unusually shocking label in the greeting line, and because the records are being presented as newly released by a data-sharing group. However, it's important to separate what is being alleged from what is independently verified, and to understand how campaign email systems and marketing lists can work. Here's what is being claimed. A non-profit transparency group known as Distributed Denial of Secrets, often abbreviated as DDoS Secrets, reportedly obtained a batch of emails connected to Epstein's estate and shared portions of that material with select news outlets. In reports describing the batch, one key detail stands out. An email address said to be linked to Jeffrey Epstein allegedly received recurring campaign-style emails during the 2020 election period. Even more notably, the greeting line in at least some of those messages reportedly addressed the recipient using a disturbing term, one that, if accurately represented, would understandably trigger a strong reaction. But before any conclusions are drawn, there are two critical context points. First, campaign fundraising operations routinely send emails to massive lists. These lists can be built through signups, data sharing arrangements, third-party vendors, forwarded chain signups, list purchases, and other marketing pipelines. In practice, this can result in messages being sent to accounts with little or no meaningful relationship to a candidate or campaign, sometimes even to addresses created for monitoring, archiving, or other purposes. In other words, the fact that an address received a campaign email does not, by itself, prove any personal connection between a candidate and the owner of that inbox. Second, greeting lines in mass emails are often generated automatically. Campaigns frequently use merge fields and personalization tokens, like first_name or a stored label for a subscriber, to increase engagement. If the stored name field is incorrect, maliciously edited, or otherwise corrupted, the resulting greeting can look bizarre, offensive, or even scandalous. That can occur due to human error, sloppy data imports, third-party list issues, or intentional manipulation in the source dataset. None of that automatically clears anyone, nor does it automatically confirm wrongdoing. It simply means the technical chain matters. So what is the core controversy in the reporting? According to the narrative being circulated, the inbox allegedly received repeated messages presented as direct appeals signed by Trump. The messages are described as urgent fundraising requests, the kind commonly used by major campaigns, and the most explosive element is the alleged salutation term used in the recipient line. Some coverage also claims that after Epstein's death, the inbox continued to receive messages, and that the name attached to the address was updated to that same shocking label. If accurate, that would suggest one of two broad possibilities. The email address existed on a campaign distribution list and its name field was set, by someone, using that label, then later retained or reused. The email archive being reviewed reflects contact record metadata or address book labeling that may not come from the campaign itself, but rather from the inbox owner, an importer, an external mail client, or an intermediary database, meaning the label could be a classification tag created by a third party rather than the campaign. To be very clear, the controversy here is not merely that an email address received campaign fundraising emails. That's relatively common and can happen for countless reasons. The controversy is the alleged wording attached to the recipient identity and how that identity field appears in the record set being circulated. Now, why is this story getting traction? Because Jeffrey Epstein remains one of the most infamous names connected to serious criminal misconduct, and because any intersection between Epstein-related materials and major political figures instantly generates intense attention online. In addition, the story is being framed by some outlets and social media users as a bombshell, implying it reveals something direct and personal. That framing, however, is exactly what should trigger extra caution. The more explosive the claim, the more important it is to verify how the records were produced, what they actually show, and whether the metadata can be authenticated independently. Some coverage also adds broader context about Epstein's interest in Trump, claiming Epstein tracked news and purchased books about Trump. Other claims referenced in Circulation include old reporting about social links in elite circles, and references to flight logs and contact records that have been debated publicly for years. Those topics are often presented in a way that implies a single unified narrative, but in reality, they involve multiple sources, different time periods, and varying levels of corroboration. What we can say safely, based on how political email systems work, is this. Campaigns send enormous volumes of emails. These messages frequently include standardized templates, high-pressure language, and signature lines that look personal even when they're automated. Most recipients are simply entries in a marketing database. The from name or signature line can be chosen for branding and performance reasons, even if the candidate never wrote or reviewed the exact message. So if an Epstein-linked address received automated campaign emails, that alone doesn't confirm anything beyond list membership. The key issue is the alleged salutation label. If the dataset truly shows that label being used as the name field for that address, it raises immediate questions. Who set that name field? When was it set? Was it set in a campaign system, a third-party email platform, or a local inbox/address book? Is the record a raw email header, a screenshot, a database export, or a reconstructed archive? Can independent investigators confirm authenticity through cryptographic hashes, original headers, or chain of custody documentation? These are not minor technicalities. They're the difference between "this was definitely sent this way by a campaign system" and "this label appears in a record set but may have been assigned by an unknown party at an unknown time." Another important element is how the materials were released. The reports claim that these emails were obtained by DDoS secrets and then shared selectively with outlets. In stories like this, selective sharing can fuel skepticism because it means the public may not have full visibility into the archive structure, the raw headers, or the complete context. That does not mean the materials are false, but it does mean the standard journalistic questions become even more important. Additionally, this story is being compared to other large document releases tied to Epstein, some of which were reportedly released by government bodies or committees. When multiple drops happen at different times from different sources, audiences sometimes assume they're part of one official verified release. Often, they're not. Each dataset has its own provenance and verification status. Mixing them together can produce misleading certainty. So what's the political impact? For Trump's critics, the story reinforces a broader argument that the public deserves maximum transparency about Epstein-related records, and that any content suggesting an intersection with major public figures should be thoroughly investigated. For Trump supporters, the story is likely to be viewed as sensationalized, potentially manipulated, or weaponized, especially if the salutation label is seen as too extreme or unnatural to be authentic. For neutral observers, this is a classic case where the truth depends on documentation, raw email headers, verifiable timestamps, and a demonstrable chain of custody. What happens next usually follows a predictable path. Journalists press for the raw materials. Analysts examine technical details, like DKIM signatures, SPF alignment, and header routing. Political actors argue over interpretation. Social media amplifies the most inflammatory phrasing, often removing nuance. The public ends up confused unless clear evidence is presented. If you're covering this as a YouTube story, the safest and most responsible approach is to present it as newly circulated records are being reported by certain outlets. Questions remain about verification. Here's what is alleged. Here's what we know about how campaign emails work. And here's what would be required to confirm authenticity. That approach helps protect your channel because it avoids stating unverified claims as fact, avoids repeating explicit harmful wording, and frames the story as an evolving report rather than a proven accusation. Bottom line, the alleged emails are being described as real, but the most explosive element, the recipient label, requires strong verification. Without raw headers and a transparent chain of custody, it's not responsible to treat that wording as a confirmed campaign-authored statement. What can be responsibly reported is that certain records are being discussed publicly, that outlets claim they originate from a particular archive source, and that the story has ignited political debate. As this develops, the key question isn't whether the claim is viral. The key question is whether the underlying technical evidence stands up to scrutiny.